She didn't scream. She didn't beg. She just stood there, cheeks split open, eyes dry as ash, while every person who claimed to love her sat frozen around a Thanksgiving table and watched her bleed. Then the doorbell rang, and the most dangerous man in Chicago walked in. He wasn't a cop. He wasn't a savior. He was something far worse, and somehow, impossibly, the only person in that room who looked at her like she was worth something. This is the story of Serafina Vale, the night she stopped surviving and started choosing. Hit like. Drop your city in the comments. Let's see how far this story travels. Bastit. The cold came in through the gap under the front door of the Vale house, like it had been waiting all year for an invitation. It curled along the baseboards, climbed the legs of the dining room chairs, and settled into the bones of everyone sitting at the table, though none of them would admit it. Admitting the cold meant admitting something was wrong with the house. And admitting something was wrong with the house meant admitting something was wrong with everything inside it. Serafina felt it in her knees first. She was standing in the kitchen threshold, holding a ceramic serving dish with both hands, watching her father's jaw work through a strip of turkey like he was angry at it. Martin Vale was 53 years old and looked 70. His face had the texture of something left out too long in the weather, creased and sallow, the skin around his eyes purple-gray from nights that started with bourbon and ended with whatever came after. He had his good suit on. He always wore his good suit on Thanksgiving. It was the one day of the year he performed the version of himself he believed he still was. The good suit didn't fool anyone. "You gonna stand there all night?" he said without looking up. Serafina moved to the table, set the dish down, stepped back. She had learned years ago to minimize her footprint in rooms where her father was drinking. Take up less space, make less noise, provide fewer surfaces for his attention to catch on. Her Aunt Carol was seated across from her Uncle Raymond, who was working steadily through his third glass of wine with the focus of a man trying to outrun a thought. Their daughter, Brianna, 17 and already expert at disappearing into her phone, hadn't looked up since Grace. Serafina's grandmother, Lorraine, sat at the end of the table closest to the window, hands folded in her lap, face arranged into the careful blankness of a woman who had survived 60 years by learning not to see certain things. No one spoke. The television in the living room murmured football scores through the wall. Martin reached for the bourbon. Serafina. He said her name the way he always said it when he'd had enough to drink, flat, like an accusation. "What did I tell you about the cranberry?" She kept her face still. "You said you wanted it on the table before dinner. And where is it?" "It's—" She glanced at the sideboard. The small ceramic bowl she'd set out 40 minutes ago sat exactly where she'd placed it. "It's right there, Dad. That's not on the table. I can move it." "Don't." He picked up his glass, set it down again without drinking. "Don't move it now. It's too late now. The whole point was—" He exhaled through his nose, rubbed his forehead with 2 fingers. "You know what? Forget it." Serafina stood very still. Carol reached for the breadbasket and said too brightly, "The turkey is wonderful, Serafina. Really, you outdid yourself this year." Nobody seconded it. Martin looked at his plate. His jaw was working again, even though he hadn't taken a bite. There was something building in him. She could feel it the way you feel a drop in barometric pressure before a storm. A kind of thickening in the air, a sense that everything loose and unsecured was about to start flying. "You want to know what my problem is?" he said. No one answered. "My problem," Martin said, pushing back slightly from the table, "is that I work. I work every single day. I provide. I give this family. I gave this family everything." His eyes went to Serafina, stayed there. "And I get daughters who can't put a bowl of cranberry sauce on a table correctly." "Martin." Lorraine's voice was quiet, not warning, just placing his name in the air like a small stone, seeing if it would anchor anything. It didn't. "She's been like this her whole life." He was still looking at Serafina. "You know that? Her whole life. Standing there like she's waiting for someone to tell her she's special. Nobody's coming, sweetheart. That's not how the world works." Serafina's hands were at her sides. She pressed her fingernails into her palms, not hard enough to draw blood, just hard enough to feel something clean and sharp to focus on. "I'm going to get more rolls," she said. She turned toward the kitchen. She was halfway there when she heard the chair scrape. She didn't run. Running made it worse. It always had, even when she was 9, even when she was 14, even now at 26 with a college degree and an apartment she could barely afford, that she only came back to because it was Thanksgiving, and because some masochistic strand of her still believed that holidays could be different. Martin's hand closed around her upper arm and spun her around. The room went absolutely silent. Even the television seemed to pause. His face was close to hers. She could smell the bourbon, the turkey grease, the stale cologne he'd put on at noon and sweated through by 3. His eyes were the eyes of a man who had lost so many arguments with the world that he'd stopped keeping score and just wanted something to break. "Look at me when I'm talking to you." "I'm looking at you, Dad. You think you're better than this house." "No. You think you're better than me." Her pulse was in her throat. "No. Then why do you always—" He released her arm, stepped back. She thought for a single breath that it was over, that the pressure had released and the storm would pass the way it sometimes did, incomplete, leaving damage no one would mention. Then he hit her. Not a slap. Not dramatic. Just his open palm, hard and flat, across her cheekbone. The blow of a man who had stopped caring whether anyone was watching. The impact spun her head sideways. She caught the doorframe with both hands and held on. The room remained silent. Carol's fork was frozen halfway to her mouth. Raymond had gone the color of old chalk. Brianna finally looked up from her phone, and then immediately looked back down, which was somehow the worst thing of all. Lorraine closed her eyes. Nobody moved. Serafina pressed her fingers to her cheek. It wasn't the pain. She'd learned to process the pain quickly, catalog it, and file it away somewhere deep and unreachable. It was the silence that broke something in her chest every time. The collective agreement of everyone in the room to pretend that what had just happened was simply part of the texture of the evening, something to be absorbed and moved past, like a dish hitting the floor. She straightened, took a breath. "I'm going to—" The doorbell rang. Everyone at the table looked toward the front of the house. Martin frowned. He wasn't expecting anyone. The frown was the frown of a man who has just been interrupted mid-performance and doesn't know how to reset. "Who the hell is that?" he muttered. No one answered. No one moved. The doorbell rang again, 3 times, measured and patient, like whoever was standing on the other side of that door had all the time in the world and wasn't particularly worried about whether anyone answered. Martin's frown deepened. He glanced at Serafina, some impulse toward normalcy flickering across his face, and then moved past her toward the front hallway. Serafina pressed her fingers harder against her cheek. Breathed. The skin was already starting to pulse with heat. She would have a bruise by morning. She always had a bruise by morning. She heard her father open the door. She heard him say, "Can I help you?" And then she heard nothing. No response, no greeting, just a silence so complete that it pulled her out of the kitchen threshold and into the hallway like gravity. The man standing in the doorway was not the kind of man you expected to see on a suburban porch in Westmont on Thanksgiving night. He was tall, well over 6 feet, and built with a kind of deliberate solidity that suggested his size was less a genetic accident than a considered decision. He was wearing a dark charcoal overcoat, the collar turned up against the cold, and beneath it a suit the color of deep water that fit him with surgical precision. His hair was dark, cut close at the sides, and his face was the face of a man who had been handsome once, and then had something happen to him that made handsome beside the point. He was somewhere in his mid-30s. He had the kind of stillness that living things develop when they've spent enough time being the most dangerous thing in any given room. He looked at Martin Vale the way you look at something you've already decided what to do with. "Martin Vale," he said. Not a question. Martin's voice had changed. The performance was gone. "Yeah, who are you? My name is Dante Vercelli." The man's eyes moved from Martin's face, a brief, disinterested scan, like reading the label on something unremarkable, and landed on Serafina. They stayed there for a moment, just a moment, long enough to take in the hand pressed to her cheek, the redness spreading beneath her fingers, the way she was standing in the hallway with her spine braced like she expected something else to hit her. Something shifted almost imperceptibly behind his eyes. "Mr. Vercelli." Martin's voice had gone from drunk and aggressive to sober and careful in under 4 seconds. Serafina had never seen him sober up that fast. Tonight isn't a good time. It's a holiday. My family's—" I know what tonight is. Dante stepped over the threshold without being invited. He did it the way water moves through a crack, without force, without drama, simply finding the path and taking it. Martin moved aside. He did it automatically, instinctively, the way every small creature in the path of something larger makes room. Dante stood in the entryway. He looked at the house, the water stain on the ceiling, the worn carpet, the family photos tilted slightly on the wall, without any expression that Serafina could read. Then his eyes came back to her. "Who is this?" he asked Martin, still looking at her. "My daughter, Serafina. She doesn't—" Martin was working to control something in his voice. "She's not involved in any of this." "No," Dante said. "She's not." He looked at her cheek, directly, without pretending not to see it, without the careful social agreement everyone else in the hallway, everyone in the dining room, everyone in this family, everyone in Serafina's entire life, had always maintained. He just looked at it the way you look at something that has been done wrong and should not have been. "You should put ice on that," he said. Serafina didn't know what to say. Nobody ever said anything directly. Nobody ever just looked straight at the damage and named it. She nodded, once, and said nothing. Dante turned back to Martin. "Dining room," he said. "Let's talk." Martin led him through the hallway. Serafina followed because she didn't know what else to do, and because something in her, some stubborn, irrational part, needed to see what happened next. The family at the table had rearranged themselves in the 30 seconds she'd been in the hallway. Everyone was sitting slightly straighter. Carol had set her fork down. Raymond had stopped drinking. Brianna's phone was in her lap, screen down, and she was watching the doorway with the wide-eyed attention of someone who has correctly identified that the quality of the silence has changed. Dante stood at the head of the table, the head that was Martin's chair, though Martin was now hovering near the wall, and looked at the assembled family with polite detachment. "I apologize for the interruption," he said. "I'll be brief." He reached into the interior pocket of his overcoat and produced a folded document. He set it on the table, not toward Martin, just on the table, where everyone could see it. "Your father," he said, addressing Serafina, though she hadn't expected to be addressed, "has an outstanding financial obligation to my organization. The current figure is $420,000. The deadline for resolution was 3 weeks ago." Serafina heard Carol make a small, involuntary sound. Martin said, "I told your people I needed more time. You told my people a number of things." Dante's voice didn't change. It was even, unhurried, the voice of a man who did not need volume to be understood. "What you owe isn't the primary reason I'm here tonight." He paused, reached again into his coat, and produced a second document. This one he held rather than set down. "I had a different proposition in mind." His eyes moved to Serafina again. She felt it like a physical thing, not threatening exactly, but weighted, serious. "One that doesn't involve your father at all." Martin made a sound of protest. Dante glanced at him, just glanced, and Martin stopped making sounds. "I need an executive assistant," Dante said. "Someone capable of managing correspondence, contracts, scheduling, and discretion. The position is residential, my estate outside the city. 3 months, with a formal contract specifying conditions, boundaries, and compensation." He looked at Serafina steadily. "At the end of 3 months, your father's debt is cleared, completely." The dining room was very quiet. Serafina could hear her own pulse. "She's not," Martin started. "I'm speaking to her," Dante said. Flat. Final. He looked at Serafina. "You can say no," he said. "You can close the door and go back to whatever tonight was before I arrived. Nobody in this room will tell you what to do." A small pause. "Including me." Serafina looked at him. She looked at the document in his hand. She looked at her father, who was standing near the wall with the bourbon looseness gone from him, replaced by something small and frightened that she recognized because it was the emotion he usually saved for when someone else controlled the room. She looked at her grandmother, who had opened her eyes again and was watching Serafina with an expression that was not quite hope and not quite grief, but something living in the space between them. She pressed her fingers once more to her cheek, felt the heat there, felt the shape of what the evening had been, and the shape of what every evening in this house had always been, and probably would continue to be. "I'll think about it," she said. "Of course." Dante reached into his coat a final time and produced a card. Plain, cream-colored, a phone number, and nothing else. He set it on the table beside the first document. "Take your time." He buttoned his coat. "Happy Thanksgiving," he said, to no one in particular. And he left. The room sat in the wreckage of his departure for a long moment. Martin moved first, toward the bourbon, reaching for it with the automatic reflex of a man whose coping mechanism lives in muscle memory. Carol began collecting plates with the determined energy of someone who needs to be doing something with their hands. Raymond refilled his wine. Brianna's phone came back out. The television murmured football through the wall. Serafina picked up the card. She carried it to the kitchen. She stood at the sink and ran cold water over a dish towel and pressed it against her cheek. She looked out the window above the sink at the Thanksgiving dark, the neighbor's driveway, the yellow cone of a streetlight, the black branches of the oak tree at the property line moving in the wind. She thought about the way Dante Vercelli had looked at her cheek, not with pity, not with the carefully managed discomfort of someone who sees something wrong and needs it to stop being their problem. He had looked at it the way you look at evidence, the way you look at something and draw a conclusion. She turned the card over. Just a number, no name, no title, nothing that could identify him to anyone who didn't already know. Her phone was in her apron pocket. She took it out, looked at it, put it back. She washed dishes for an hour. She listened to her father drink himself quiet in the dining room. She listened to Carol and Raymond make excuse conversation until they could leave with minimum awkwardness. She listened to Brianna say goodnight and climb the stairs and close her door. She listened to her grandmother come into the kitchen at 9 o'clock, pour herself a glass of water and stand beside her at the sink without saying anything for a very long time. Then Lorraine said, "You're not going back to that apartment tonight, are you?" It wasn't a question. Serafina looked at her cheek in the dark reflection of the window glass. The bruise was coming in purple along the cheekbone, clean-edged and definitive. "I don't know," she said. Lorraine set down her glass, put her hand briefly on Serafina's shoulder, just a moment, light as a thought, and then went to bed. Serafina stood at the sink until the house went completely quiet. Then she took out her phone, took out the cream-colored card, and dialed the number. It rang twice. "Miss Vale?" His voice was the same as it had been in the dining room, level, unhurried, like he had expected the call and had simply been waiting for it to happen at whatever time it happened. She pressed the cold towel harder against her cheek. "I have questions," she said. "Ask them." She asked them. All of them. She asked about the contract, what it covered, what it didn't, what happened if she wanted to leave. She asked about her own freedom of movement, whether she would have access to a car, whether she could contact people outside the estate. She asked what executive assistant meant in practical terms. She asked what happened to her father's debt if she stayed only 2 months instead of 3. Dante answered every question, directly, without hedging, without the soft diplomatic language of someone managing her toward a predetermined outcome. He answered like a man who had already decided the terms were fair and saw no reason to obscure them. When she ran out of questions, there was a pause. "Is there anything else?" he asked. "Why me?" she said. A longer pause this time. "Because you were the only person in that room," he said, who wasn't pretending. She didn't have a response to that. "I'll send a car at 9, he said. "If you're not there, I'll know you made a different choice, and I'll respect that." The call ended. Serafina stood in the kitchen of her father's house, in the dark, holding a phone that had gone to black screen, and made herself breathe slowly through whatever was happening in her chest. She spent the night in her old room, the one that still had the bookshelf she'd built from scavenged boards when she was 15, still had the water stain above the closet she'd spent years telling herself looked like a mountain range. She didn't sleep much. She lay on top of the covers with her coat on and her shoes beside the bed, and stared at the ceiling and ran the conversation through her mind in its exact sequence. He had answered every question. At 6 in the morning, she heard her father come down the stairs, shuffle through the kitchen, leave by the back door. She heard his truck start and reverse out of the driveway. Where he went at 6 on the morning after Thanksgiving, she had never known and had stopped trying to understand. At 7, she got up, made coffee, sat at the kitchen table with the cream-colored card and her phone, and let herself weigh it out one more time. The real weight of it, not the dramatic fear and not the desperate hope, but the actual practical arithmetic. 3 months. A contract with defined terms. Freedom to leave. And at the end of it, the thing that had kept her chained to this house, to this man, to this continuous erosion of herself, gone. She packed a bag. It took 18 minutes. 26 years of life, and she could fit the things that actually mattered into a single duffel bag. And something about that was the saddest and most clarifying fact she had encountered in a long time. She wrote a note for her grandmother, 3 sentences. She left it on the kitchen counter under the salt shaker where Lorraine would find it. At 8:57, she walked out the front door of her father's house with her duffel bag over one shoulder, and the cold pressing in from all directions, and the bruise on her cheek gone from hot to the deep-settled ache of the day after. At 8:59, a black car rounded the corner at the end of the street. She stood on the porch and watched it come. She was terrified. She was clear-eyed and deliberate, and she had made this choice with the full weight of her intelligence behind it. And she was still terrified, and both things were true simultaneously, and neither one canceled the other out. The car stopped at the curb. The driver got out, young, silent, wearing a dark jacket, and opened the rear door without a word. Serafina walked down the porch steps. She didn't look back at the house. She had learned a long time ago that looking back at things you're leaving only makes you hesitate, and she had hesitated enough in her life. She got in the car. The door closed. And the house, her father, the dining room, the Thanksgiving table, and every dinner just like it receded in the rear window like something she was finally outrunning. The drive north took 45 minutes. She spent most of it watching the city change around her. The familiar flatness of the western suburbs giving way to denser streets. Then the lakefront opening up, gray and enormous, on her right. She had her bag in her lap. Her hands were folded over it. She didn't ask the driver anything, and he offered nothing. When the car turned off the main road and began moving along a private lane through trees that were bare and black against the November sky, her pulse picked up again. The estate emerged from the tree line gradually. It was larger than she'd expected, not gaudy, not a monument to wealth for its own sake, but substantial in the way that things built to last tend to be. Stone exterior, dark wood accents, a front approach that curved through grounds that would be considerable in summer, and were, even now in the dead of November, immaculately kept. Lights on in the upper windows, smoke from a chimney, 2 men in dark jackets standing near the entrance, visible but not aggressive, watching the car approach with the professional attention of people paid to notice things. The car stopped. The driver opened her door again. Serafina stepped out onto the gravel and stood in the cold and looked at the house. And the house looked back at her. She heard footsteps on the stone steps. She turned. Dante Vercelli came down them without hurry, hands in the pockets of a dark jacket. No overcoat this morning. He looked exactly as he had looked the night before, composed, unhurried, the kind of still that you only find in people who have stopped being afraid of the silence in a room. He stopped at the bottom of the steps, looked at her face. The bruise. "Good morning," he said. "Good morning," she said. There was a pause, not uncomfortable, just present. "How'd you sleep?" he asked. "I didn't." Something moved across his face, not quite a smile, something more complicated. "No," he said. "I didn't think so." He stepped aside and gestured toward the door. "Come inside," he said. "I'll show you where things are." She shifted her bag on her shoulder and walked up the steps and through the door he held open and into the warmth of the house. And she had the distinct, unnerving sensation of stepping across a threshold she would not be able to uncross. Not because anyone was forcing her, but because she was choosing it, with her whole self. And the choosing felt like it mattered in a way that very few choices in her 26 years had ever felt like they mattered. The entrance hall was wide and warm, lit by low pendant lights, floored in dark stone. A staircase curved up to the right. Hallways extended in 2 directions. The smell of the place was coffee and wood smoke and something faintly like cedar. A woman appeared from the hallway to the left, 50s, broad-shouldered, with a face that had been arranged into a permanent expression of competent skepticism. She looked at Serafina with the frank assessment of someone who does not waste time on social performance. "This is Elena," Dante said. "She runs the house. She'll take you through the practical arrangements and show you your suite. I have a meeting in an hour." Elena nodded at Serafina. Not unfriendly, not warm, professional. "Your things can go there," Elena said, nodding at a low bench near the door. "I'll have someone bring them up. Come with me." Serafina set her bag down. She followed Elena through the house, half listening to the practical inventory. The kitchen hours, the Wi-Fi, the east wing she was welcome to use, the north corridor she should stay away from, and half cataloging everything she was seeing. The house was not what she'd expected from a man with Dante Vercelli's reputation. It was not theatrical. It was not decorated with the self-conscious markers of power. It was simply a large, well-made house that had been lived in by someone who knew what they wanted and had furnished it accordingly. Books, actual books, on the shelves in the hallway, a coat rack with a worn jacket still on it, a mug left on a table that someone had started and not finished. Evidence of a person, not a persona. The suite Elena showed her was on the second floor, east side, with windows facing the backgrounds and beyond them the pale gray line of the lake. It was larger than her apartment. There was a sitting room, a bedroom, a bathroom with black tile, and a tub she could have fit her entire former life into. Fresh flowers on the dresser, white, simple, and a stack of blank notebooks on the desk, and a laptop still in its packaging. "Mr. Vercelli had those ordered this morning," Elena said, nodding at the laptop. "He said you'd need tools." Serafina stood in the middle of the room and looked at all of it. "Bathroom's through there," Elena said. "Towels are in the cabinet on the right. If you need anything specific, write it down and I'll have someone get it." "Thank you," Serafina said. Elena looked at her cheek, looked at it the same way Dante had, directly, without theater. "I'll bring ice," she said, and left. Serafina stood alone in the room. She walked to the window. The ground spread out below. Stone paths, bare-limbed trees, the geometry of what would be gardens in warmer months. Beyond them, past a low fence and a slope of grass, the lake was visible and enormous and indifferent. She pressed her palm flat against the glass. It was cold. She had 3 months. That was what she had agreed to. 3 months, a contract with defined terms, her father's debt cleared, and then whatever came next. It was a transaction. It was a business arrangement entered into by two adults with clear eyes. She told herself this steadily, the way you establish the facts of a situation when you are afraid that the facts might not be enough to anchor you. She heard a knock at the door. "Come in." Elena entered with a wrapped cloth of ice. She crossed to Serafina and held it out. Serafina took it, pressed it against her cheek. "He's not what you think he is," Elena said. Serafina looked at her. Elena shrugged, the shrug of someone who has said what needed saying and has no interest in elaborating. "I've worked for this family for 12 years. I know what people expect when they come here." She turned toward the door. "Just thought you should know." She left. Serafina stood at the window with the ice against her face and the lake in front of her, and 12 years' worth of something she couldn't name yet, settling somewhere in her chest like snow on still water. She didn't know what she thought he was. She didn't know what she was either. Not anymore. Not after the choice she'd made this morning. Not standing in this room with its fresh flowers and its unopened laptop and its view of a body of water so large it looked like the beginning of something. She would figure it out. She had always figured things out. That was the one thing the years in her father's house had given her that she could use. The knowledge that she was more durable than the damage. She set the ice down on the windowsill, looked at her reflection in the glass. The bruise, the travel-worn face, the unfamiliar room framing her from behind. For the first time in longer than she could accurately remember, the face looking back at her belonged to someone who had made a choice, not survived one, not been dragged through one, made one. It was a small thing. It was also, she suspected, everything. She turned from the window and began to unpack. The contract signing happened at noon. Dante's office was on the ground floor, in the south wing, behind a door that looked like every other door in the corridor, and gave no indication of what lay behind it. The room itself was simple to the point of austerity. A desk, 2 chairs, bookshelves along 2 walls, a window facing the grounds. No art, no decorative intent whatsoever, just function and the accumulated weight of work. Dante was already seated when Elena showed her in. He had a copy of the contract in front of him and a pen. He gestured to the chair across the desk. Serafina sat, picked up her copy, read it. She read all of it. 12 pages. She read every clause, every definition, every condition. Dante said nothing while she read. He had a pen in his hand and he turned it slowly between his fingers, the only indication that he was a person sitting in a room rather than a piece of furniture. When she finished, she set the contract down. Page 6, she said, subsection C. The non-disclosure terms extend 2 years beyond the end of the agreement. That's correct. I want 18 months. He looked at her. Something in his face registered, not surprise exactly, more like recognition. Why 18? He asked. Because 2 years is punitive and 18 months is reasonable. I'll have moved on sufficiently by then to have nothing worth disclosing anyway. He picked up his pen, made a notation on his copy. 18 months. She read 3 more pages. Page 9, she said. The vehicle provision. It says I have access to a vehicle with 24 hours notice. Correct. I want same-day access. 4 hours minimum. He made another notation. 4 hours. She read the rest. The exit provision, she said finally. It says I can terminate with 30 days written notice, but there's no corresponding obligation on your end. You can terminate with 30 days notice as well, which means the debt erasure is contingent on completion, he said. I know. Then I want a partial erasure schedule. If I complete 60 days, 60% of the debt is cleared. If I complete 90, 100%. He was quiet for a moment, looking at her in that even, unreadable way he had. You've negotiated contracts before, he said. I've been on the receiving end of bad ones. Another small something crossed his face. Not a smile exactly. Something adjacent to it. He made the notation, initialed it, slid the contract across the desk. Page 9, he said. Initial the vehicle clause. Page 6, initial the NDA amendment. Back page, full signature. She initialed, signed, slid it back. He countersigned without ceremony and handed her the copy. Your first responsibility, he said, starts tomorrow morning. I'll need the scheduling system reorganized. You'll see why when you access it. There are 3 current contracts that need review for compliance issues, and the correspondence backlog is... He paused, a brief, dry pause. Substantial. How substantial? 3 months. She looked at him. My last assistant, he said without elaboration, left unexpectedly. She didn't ask. She had the sense that she would understand everything in its own time, or she wouldn't, and that either outcome would be less dangerous than asking questions before she'd earned the right to the answers. She stood. He stood. They did not shake hands. Dinner's at 7, he said. Elena will show you the dining room. You're welcome to join or not, as you prefer. I'll join, she said. He nodded once. She walked to the door, paused, turned back. Mr. Vercelli? Yes. She held the contract. What was the debt actually for? He looked at her steadily. Your father borrowed money to cover losses from a business that no longer exists. He borrowed it from people who do not accept excuses and do not renegotiate timelines. A pause. He borrowed it 3 times over the course of 4 years. Serafina absorbed this. He spent it, she said, not a question. He spent it, Dante confirmed, and lost what remained, and then borrowed again. She thought about the house, the worn carpet, the suit her father wore 1 day a year to perform the man he believed he still was. Thank you for telling me, she said. You asked. She left. She spent the afternoon in the room she'd been given, the room that was, for the next 90 days, hers, sitting at the desk with the unboxed laptop, reading through the files Dante's assistant had left instructions for transferring to her access. The scheduling system was worse than substantial. It was a disaster. Appointments double-booked, correspondence misfiled, entire threads of communication dropped midstream like severed lines. She made a list. She made a plan. She lost track of time in the way she always did when a problem was large enough and clear enough to absorb her completely. And when she finally looked up, the window had gone dark, and the lake had disappeared into the night, and someone had, at some point she hadn't noticed, placed a cup of tea on the edge of the desk. Still warm. She looked at it for a moment. Then she picked it up and drank it and went back to work. Dinner was at 7 in a dining room that was nothing like the dining room she'd grown up in. No performance of normalcy here, no careful arrangement of things to suggest a family that didn't exist. Just a long table, set simply, lit by candles because the overhead light was apparently broken and had been for, Elena told her dryly, approximately 4 months. There were 4 of them. Dante at the head. Serafina to his left. Elena at the far end. A man named Caruso. Broad, quiet, with the face of someone who has seen too much to be startled by anything, to Dante's right. Nobody performed. The food was good. The wine was poured without ceremony. The conversation was occasional and practical. Scheduling, an issue with the grounds perimeter. A delivery expected Thursday. She ate and listened and asked nothing. At the end of the meal, Dante refilled her wine without asking and said, "How far did you get?" "Roughly 40% of the scheduling issue. The correspondence is going to take longer. Some of the threads are missing context I don't have yet. I'll brief you in the morning. 7 okay?" 6:30, he said. 6:30, she agreed. He looked at her cheek again. The bruise had deepened into the colors of the day after, purple and green, spreading slightly toward her eye. He didn't say anything about it. He had said what needed saying the night before. But he looked at it. And she understood, sitting at this table in this house, with her wine and her contract and her 90 days ahead of her, that being looked at, really looked at, by someone who saw exactly what was there and didn't look away, was something she had never quite gotten used to. She wasn't sure yet whether that was because it frightened her or because it felt like something she hadn't known she'd been missing. She finished her wine. "Good night," she said, and meant it more than she'd meant a good night in longer than she could remember. She was asleep before 10, in the bed in the room with the lake outside the window, and she did not dream of her father's house, and she did not dream of what she'd left, and the last thing she thought before sleep pulled her under was a fact, clean and simple. She was here. She had chosen this, and tomorrow morning she would begin to find out what that meant. What she didn't know, what she couldn't have known, lying there in the dark, was that 3 floors above her, in an office that overlooked the same grounds from a different angle, a man was sitting at a desk with a glass of water untouched beside his hand, looking at a copy of a signed contract, and that the thing he was feeling as he looked at it was something that had no business being in the same room as a debt agreement, and that somewhere in the city her father had made a phone call, and on the other end of that call, someone had answered who had been waiting a very long time for Martin Vale to become useful. The call Martin Vale made that night lasted 4 minutes and 30 seconds. Serafina didn't know this. She was 3 floors below, already asleep, already losing herself to the first dreamless night she'd had in longer than she could measure. She didn't know about the call. She didn't know about the man who answered it. She didn't know that the thing she had walked away from had immediately begun following her. She found out about other things first. 6:30 came the way it always does in November, without ceremony, without light, with nothing to recommend it except that it was technically morning and the coffee Elena had already made was strong enough to count as a personal intervention. Serafina was at the desk in Dante's office at 6:28, laptop open, the scheduling disaster pulled up in 3 windows, a legal pad beside her covered in the notes she'd made the night before. Dante came in at 6:31. He looked like a man who had slept exactly as much as he needed to, and not a minute more. He had a cup of coffee in his hand, black, no theater, and he stood in the doorway for a moment looking at the 3-window setup she'd arranged. "You color-coded it," he said. "Green is confirmed. Yellow is needs confirmation. Red is a conflict." She turned in the chair. "You have 4 red conflicts in the next 2 weeks. One of them is a problem." He came to the desk, stood beside her looking at the screen, close enough that she could smell the coffee. He smelled like wood smoke and something clean she didn't have a name for. "Which one?" he said. "Thursday. You have a meeting at the Harrington building at 2, which one of your people confirmed 6 weeks ago. You also have a meeting at the same time with someone named Falcone, which was added to the system, poorly, by your previous assistant 11 days ago. Neither party knows about the other." A pause. "Falcone," Dante said. His voice didn't change, but something in the room did. "I flagged it because the contact information for Falcone is different from your other business contacts. No company name, no secondary number, just a first name and a time." She looked at him. I didn't reschedule anything. I wanted to ask you first. Dante set his coffee down, looked at the screen. His jaw was doing something careful and contained, the way a person holds still when they're deciding how much to explain. Move the Harrington meeting to Friday morning, he said. Don't touch Falcone. Okay. And don't put Falcone's name in the system again. If it needs to be referenced, use F. She looked at him. I don't ask you to be comfortable with everything, he said. I ask you to be precise and discreet. I can do both, she said. Good. He picked up his coffee. What else? She walked him through the rest. The correspondence backlog, 3 vendor contracts with compliance gaps she'd identified, a series of unanswered communications from someone named Ricci that had gone unaddressed for 19 days and were getting progressively less polite in tone. Dante listened. He didn't interrupt. He didn't make the sounds people make when they're performing attention, the mhms, the nods timed to signal comprehension. He just listened, his eyes on the screen, and when she finished, he said, Ricci can wait another week. He'll be unpleasant about it, and then he'll stop. The vendor on page 3 needs a call today, not a letter. His compliance gap is deliberate, and he responds to directness. The correspondence, he paused. I'll send you a key for the filing context this afternoon. Some of the missing threads will make more sense after that. She wrote it down. Questions? He said. 1. She kept her pen on the pad. The North Corridor. Elena said to stay out of it. I don't need to know why, but I do need to know if there are scheduling implications I should be aware of. He looked at her. The look was measuring, not unkind. No scheduling implications, he said. Okay. It's a personal matter. I didn't ask what it was. Something moved across his face again. That complicated adjacency to a smile that she was beginning to recognize as his version of one. No, he said. You didn't. He left. She worked. The first week passed in the manner of things that are difficult and absorbing, quickly in retrospect, brutally in the moment. The scheduling system came under control by Wednesday. The vendor call happened Tuesday afternoon, with Serafina on the line taking notes while Dante delivered the kind of precise and unemotional rebuke that left the vendor apologizing before the call was 2 minutes old. The correspondence backlog reduced by half. The filing key Dante sent her unlocked layers of context that reframed everything she'd been reading. What had looked like routine business correspondence revealed itself as a complex, overlapping network of obligations and arrangements that extended well beyond anything she had vocabulary for yet. She didn't ask questions she hadn't earned the right to. She worked from 6:30 to 7 most evenings. She ate dinner with Dante and Elena and Caruso, and occasionally with other men who came and went from the estate with the purposeful silence of people on assignments. She learned their names and forgot to be afraid of them, which surprised her. They were polite. They were quiet. They did not treat her with the particular brand of condescension she had expected and was prepared to defend against. Caruso taught her which coffee maker in the kitchen produced results worth drinking and which was decorative. A man named Sal held the door for her 3 days running without being asked and without making it a thing. The house worked around her in the way houses do when you are present long enough to become part of their rhythm. She called her grandmother on Thursday. Lorraine picked up on the second ring, which meant she'd been expecting the call. You're all right, Lorraine said. Not a question. I'm all right. The bruise? Fading. A pause. Your father called me. Serafina's hand tightened on the phone. What did he say? He wanted to know where you were. A longer pause. I told him I didn't know. Thank you. Serafina. Her grandmother's voice was careful, the way hands are careful when they're holding something that might break. Whatever you're doing, wherever you are you safe? She looked out the window at the grounds. 2 of Dante's men were doing something with the perimeter fence at the east corner, visible and unhurried in the cold afternoon light. Yes, she said, and meant it, which was, itself, a kind of astonishment. What she didn't tell her grandmother was that her father had also called her directly, twice, on Tuesday. She had not answered. His voicemail was 3 minutes of the particular cocktail she knew by heart. Grievance and self-pity and the edge of threat that he would never fully commit to because committing to it would require honesty about himself he was incapable of. She deleted the voicemail and went back to work. Thursday came, the Falcone meeting. She knew about it only because it was in the system and she had put it there in her reorganization. She didn't know what it was. She didn't know where it was taking place. It wasn't at the estate. Dante left at 1:15 with Caruso and 2 other men, all of them in dark jackets, all of them with the compressed, readied quality of people going somewhere that requires a particular kind of attention. He came back at 4:45. She heard the car, heard the front door, heard voices in the entrance hall. Dante and Caruso, quick and low. The kind of exchange that happens when something has occurred that needs immediate resolution. She was at her desk. She kept working. At 5:10, her office door, the small room adjacent to Dante's that Elena had set up as her workspace, opened without a knock. Dante came in. He had his jacket off. There was a cut along his left jaw, small and already clotting, that had not been there when he left. He looked at her desk, then at her. "Do you have the Alderman correspondence?" he said. She pulled it without comment and held it out. He took it, read it standing up. His eyes moved across the page quickly, with the kind of focus that narrows everything else in the room to peripheral. "The original terms," he said. "What was the arbitration clause?" Section 8. Any dispute goes to a mutually agreed third-party arbiter within 30 days of the dispute being formally filed. There's no provision for unilateral enforcement. He set the document down, pressed the heel of his hand against the desk for a moment. She watched the cut on his jaw. A thin line, clean-edged. Whatever had made it had been precise. "Falcone," she said. "Careful." Not a question. He looked at her. "I'm not asking what happened," she said. "I'm asking if there's something I need to prepare for." A long pause. He was deciding something. "Not tonight," he said. "Possibly by the end of next week." She nodded, wrote a note. "I'll keep a contingency block in the schedule. Do you need the Ricci correspondence as well?" Something in his face shifted, fractional, but she was learning to read the small adjustments. "Why Ricci?" he said. "Because you told me he'd stop being unpleasant after a week, and it's been a week, and his last message yesterday was different in tone. Less aggressive. More," she paused, reaching for the right word. "Patient." Dante was very still. "Show me," he said. She pulled the message. He read it. The stillness in him changed quality. It became the stillness of something that has identified a threat and is determining its dimensions. "When did this come in?" "Yesterday, 4:17. Did anyone else see it?" "No, I processed the correspondence alone." He folded the printout, put it in his jacket pocket. "Cancel everything Friday afternoon, clear 3 hours." "Done." He went to the door, stopped, turned back. "Serafina." She looked up. "You did the right thing bringing this to me." She held his eyes. "I didn't bring it to you. I showed it to you when you were already in the room." He looked at her for a moment. "Same thing," he said. "It's not, actually. One is initiative and one is response." The almost smile. "Then next time, bring it to me." "I will," she said. He left. She sat in the quiet of her office and let the room settle around her and thought about the cut on his jaw, and the message from Ricci, and the meeting that had no name in the system except the letter F. And she understood, sitting there, that she was not working for an executive in any conventional sense, and that the life she'd agreed to live inside for 90 days was shaped by things that did not appear in any contract. She understood this. She stayed anyway. The second week was harder. It was harder because she was sleeping better, which meant she was less armored. Exhaustion is a kind of protection. It keeps you too depleted to feel things fully. When you start sleeping, the feelings catch up. What she felt, beginning around the 9th or 10th day, was the specific and inconvenient awareness of the person she was working for, not the idea of him, not the reputation or the fear he generated in every person who heard his name or every room he entered. Him. The actual man who came into her office every morning at 6:30 with coffee he never offered to share because he was not performatively considerate, only actually considerate, which looked different. Who read every document she prepared with the same thorough attention regardless of whether it was a vendor contract or a calendar update. Who had not, in 10 days, raised his voice once. She noticed this more than she should have. She noticed the way he moved through the house, unhurried, but with a direction to every movement that suggested he was always going somewhere specific, never wandering. She noticed that he ate dinner with them every night without exception, that he asked Elena questions about the household and listened to the answers, that when Caruso's mother called during dinner on Tuesday, Dante told him to take it without being asked. She noticed that there was a room at the end of the east corridor, not the north wing, the east corridor, her part of the house, that was always closed, and that once when she came back from the kitchen late, she heard music from behind the door, something low and instrumental that she didn't recognize, and that stopped when she passed too close. She noticed too much. She went to the kitchen at 11 on Wednesday night for water and found him there. Just there. Standing at the counter with the lights low, a glass of water in his hand, not doing anything except existing in a room at a time when he apparently couldn't sleep. They looked at each other. "I didn't know you'd be up," she said. "I'm not always." He looked at the bruise on her cheek. 10 days in, it had faded to a yellowish shadow at the edge of her cheekbone. Almost gone. "It's healing." "It's fine," she said. "You should eat something." "I came for water." "The bread from tonight is in the cabinet above the toaster. Elena makes it." Serafina looked at the cabinet, looked at him. He had his back to the counter, arms loose at his sides, and he was watching her with the same attention he gave everything. Complete, unhurried, neither warm nor cold, simply present. She got water. She got bread. She stood at the counter on the opposite side and ate half a piece and tried to be someone who was comfortable existing in a kitchen at 11 at night with a man who had more power than anyone she'd ever known and was, at this particular moment, wearing a gray t-shirt and looking like someone who hadn't slept well in probably several years. "The music," she said. She hadn't planned to say it. He looked at her. "Down the hall. I heard it. Wednesday last week." He was quiet. "You don't have to explain it," she said. "It's not a secret," he said. "It's just not a conversation I've had in a while." She waited. He looked at the counter. "My mother played piano. She was good at it." A pause. "She died when I was 11. I kept the instrument." Serafina was quiet. "I can't play," he said. "I never learned properly. But sometimes at night, I go in there and—" He stopped. "It sounds exactly like it sounds." "It sounds like you miss her," Serafina said. He looked at her. Something in his face was very unguarded for a moment. Just a moment. A crack in the surface that closed almost immediately. "Yeah," he said. "It does." She finished the bread, rinsed her glass, set it in the rack. "Good night," she said. "Good night." She went back to her room. She stood at the window, looking at the lake, and made herself be precise about what she was feeling. Not romance, not foolishness, not the catastrophic stupidity of developing feelings for a man whose world was made of things she could not touch and survive. Just recognition. The specific ache of recognizing someone who has been damaged in ways that shaped them rather than destroyed them, and has done the difficult, invisible work of learning to function anyway. She recognized it because she had done the same work. She stood at the window until she was sure she was only tired and not anything more complicated than that, and then she went to bed. She almost convinced herself. The second week ended with a Sunday that felt like a held breath. She was in the sitting room adjacent to her suite, reading through contract amendments, when she heard voices in the entrance hall below, raised voices, which was unusual enough that she stopped reading and listened. She couldn't make out words, just tone. Someone was angry, controlled, but angry, with the particular bitten-off quality of anger that has been in the room for a while and is reaching its limits. She went to the landing and looked down. There were 3 men in the entrance hall she hadn't seen before. Well-dressed, 40s, the kind of men who carry their wealth like an extra layer of clothing. 2 of them were standing near the door. The third was closest to the foot of the stairs, facing Caruso, who was blocking the hallway toward Dante's office with the particular stillness of someone who has done this before and will do it as many times as necessary. The third man's voice came up clearly. "Tell him it's not a request. We had an agreement and the timeline has changed. He needs to be available." Caruso said nothing. "You tell him Marchetti is not a patient man." Caruso said, "Mr. Vercelli is aware of Mr. Marchetti's schedule. He'll be in contact at his convenience. The man, not Marchetti, she understood, but someone speaking for him, took a step closer to Caruso. It was the kind of step designed to communicate something through proximity. Caruso didn't move. His convenience, the man said, voice dropping, is no longer... That's enough. Dante's voice came from the hallway behind Caruso. He came through and stood beside Caruso and looked at the three men with the exact same expression he used for everything. Level, present, unimpressed by the drama being performed for his benefit. "Gentlemen," he said, "you're in my house without an appointment." "Mr. Vercelli." "That's not an apology," Dante said. That's a name." The man recalibrated. "We apologize for the intrusion. Mr. Marchetti has asked us to communicate the urgency personally." "I understand the urgency. I've understood it since Friday." Dante glanced at the two men near the door, a quick, cataloging glance. "Tell Marchetti I'll call him Tuesday. Not because I don't understand his schedule, but because the terms he's proposing require my attorney to review language that I received this morning." A pause. "Tuesday," the man said. "Tuesday," Dante said. There was a long moment in which nothing moved, and the quality of the silence was something that Serafina, watching from above, could feel in her sternum. Then the three men left. Dante stood in the entrance hall for a moment after the door closed. He looked at Caruso. Caruso looked at him. Something passed between them. Not words, just the compressed exchange of people who have worked together long enough to have a language made of silences. Then Dante looked up. He saw her on the landing. He didn't look surprised. He didn't look anything. "Come down," he said. "I need you to pull the Marchetti file and find every reference to timeline language." She came down. She found the references. 6 of them, spread across 4 documents, 2 of which she'd flagged in her first week for precisely the kind of vagueness that could become a weapon in a dispute. She brought them to his office. He read them. He marked them. He asked her 3 precise questions about the filing dates, and she answered all 3 from memory. When he was done, he leaned back in his chair and looked at the ceiling for a moment. The cut on his jaw had fully healed. There was a new tension across his shoulders that she recognized as something that had not been there in the first week. "The Marchetti situation," she said. He looked at her. "Is it going to require scheduling changes?" "Probably." "Then I should know enough to work around it without knowing enough to be a liability." He held her eyes, long enough that she felt the weight of it. "Marchetti is a partner in a real estate operation I control 40% of," he said. "He's decided he wants to control 60. The timeline language you found is his argument. My attorney's counter-argument is the clause on page 11 of the original agreement." He paused. "That's what you need to know." "That's enough," she said. "Yes," he said. "It is." She gathered the files, stood. "Serafina." She stopped. He was looking at her with something different in his face. Not the professional attention, not the measuring look. Something more exposed. Shorter. Like he had started a sentence and was only now discovering what it was. "The man at the door," he said. "Were you frightened?" She considered this honestly. "No," she said. "Watchful. Not frightened." He nodded slowly. "You should have been a little frightened," he said. And it wasn't a criticism. It sounded almost like concern. "I'll work on it," she said. She went back to her office. She sat at her desk and put the files in order, and told herself that the thing in his voice when he said she should have been frightened, the thing that sounded like he was worried about her, specifically, not in general, was the tone of an employer who didn't want to be responsible for a casualty. She told herself this with some conviction. And then at 7:43 on a Sunday evening, her phone rang. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer. She answered. "Serafina," her father's voice. Thicker than usual, words slightly imprecise at the edges. He'd been drinking, but not so much that he'd lost the thread, just enough to have decided he was entitled. "I know where you are." She was very still. "I don't know what he told you," Martin said. "I don't know what kind of arrangement you think you have, but you need to come home." "That's not my home," she said. "I'm your father. I know who you are." "He's using you." Martin's voice had the certainty of someone who has rehearsed this. "Whatever he told you, whatever he showed me the debt documents," she said. "All 4 years of them." Silence. He showed me the amounts, the dates, the terms. She kept her voice level. She had learned level from a master in the past 2 weeks. I know what you borrowed. I know what you spent it on. I know you went back 3 times. Martin's breathing on the line was audible and ragged. Serafina, don't call this number again, she said. She hung up. She sat with the phone in her hand and waited for the anger or the grief or the complicated love that had always followed the anger and the grief. She waited for the specific pull of it, the gravitational field of the person who raised you, damaged and damaging and still somehow home. She waited. What came instead was something quieter, steadier, not peace exactly, but the early architecture of it. She set the phone down. She went back to work. What she didn't know, couldn't have known, was that her father had made a second call immediately after she'd hung up. That this call had gone not to a number in his contacts, but to the number he'd been given 3 weeks ago by the man who'd answered his first call on Thanksgiving night. What she didn't know was that the voice on the other end had said, "Good. Keep her rattled. We need Vercelli distracted." What she didn't know was that Ricci, the Ricci whose messages had changed tone, whose patience had replaced his aggression, had been in the same room as that voice. And what she didn't know was that somewhere in the city, a man named Marchetti had just decided that Tuesday was too long to wait, and that the fastest way to resolve a dispute over 60% of a real estate operation was to remove the 40% entirely. She found out the following Thursday. She found out because she was the one who opened the envelope. It arrived in the morning mail, addressed to the estate, no return address, postmarked from a mailbox 6 blocks from Ricci's last known address, a detail she only connected later, after everything had already. The envelope was standard, white, letter-sized, the kind you buy in bulk from any office supply store. Her name wasn't on it, just the estate's address, printed from a machine, no handwriting to analyze, no personality to read. She almost set it in the general correspondence pile without opening it. She opened it because it had no return address, and she had learned in 3 weeks that the communications most worth paying attention to were the ones that didn't identify themselves. Inside was a single photograph. She looked at it for 4 seconds before she understood what she was seeing. Then she set it face down on the desk and sat very still and made herself breathe through the specific nausea of comprehension arriving too fast. She picked it up again. The photograph showed the entrance to the estate, taken from outside the gate, through the iron bars, with a telephoto lens, the kind of shot that communicates not just information, but intent. Communicates, I have been here. I have been watching. I know the shape of your perimeter, and I am not impressed by it. In the foreground of the shot, walking up the interior path toward the main door, was Serafina. She recognized the coat. Tuesday, 2 days ago. The timestamp in the lower right corner confirmed it, 8:47 a.m. On the back of the photograph, written in ink, 3 words, "She works here." She turned it back over, looked at herself in the photograph, small, purposeful, crossing the path she'd walked 100 times in 3 weeks without once thinking about what she looked like from the outside of the gate. She picked up her phone and walked down the hall to Dante's office and knocked once and opened the door. He was on a call. He looked up. He saw her face. He said into the phone, "I'll call you back," and hung up before the other person could respond. She crossed the room and put the photograph on his desk. He looked at it. He picked it up. He turned it over. He read the 3 words on the back with an expression that did not change in any way that a stranger would notice. But she was not a stranger anymore, and she noticed the thing that happened to his eyes. A sharpening, an internal shift, like a room where someone has just locked the door. "When did this arrive?" he said. "This morning's mail. I opened it 10 minutes ago." He set the photograph down, picked up his own phone, sent a text. She saw his thumbs move, brief and precise, and put the phone face down on the desk. "Did you touch the envelope?" "Yes." "With gloves?" "No." He nodded. "It won't matter. This wasn't sent to be traced." He looked at her. "Are you all right?" "I'm trying to figure out if I should be frightened," she said. Something moved through his face. "Yes," he said. "This one, you should be frightened." She sat down in the chair across from his desk. She hadn't been invited to sit. She sat anyway, because her legs had made a decision her composure hadn't caught up to yet. "This is from Marchetti," she said. Dante was quiet for a moment. Tell me why you think that, he said. Because Ricci's messages changed tone 2 weeks ago. Because Marchetti sent people to your house on a Sunday without an appointment, which is a communication about power, not about scheduling. Because whoever sent this used her as the subject rather than sending it to her, which means it was sent to you and she was the message. She stopped, heard herself. Me. I was the message. Dante looked at her steadily. Yes, he said. They know I'm here. They've known since approximately your second day, he said. I knew they knew. I didn't know how they planned to use it. He tapped the photograph once with his index finger. Now I know. She felt the cold of this move through her. Not panic, just the clean physical fact of fear settling into her bones like the November cold had settled into the Vale house. Recognizable, manageable, if you didn't fight it. My father, she said. Dante was quiet. He called me Sunday, she said. He said he knew where I was. She looked at the photograph. He told them, still quiet. Dante. He looked at her when she said his name. She had not used it before. The contract had been signed with Mr. Vercelli, and she had used it every day since, the formal distance of it a structure she'd relied on. Your father, he said, made contact with Ricci's people the night you arrived here. The room was very still. How long have you known that? She said. Since the following morning. She looked at him. The steadiness she'd built over 3 weeks was doing something complicated. Not collapsing, not cracking, but flexing in ways she hadn't tested yet. You knew my father was feeding them information, she said. And you didn't tell me. I knew he'd made contact. I didn't know what he was providing until Ricci's messages changed. He met her eyes. He did not look away or offer the softening that people offer when they've done something they know was wrong. I should have told you sooner. That was a mistake. She took a breath. Let it out. The anger was there. She could feel its heat behind her sternum. But she had learned too well in her life what anger spent recklessly cost, so she held it. What does this photograph mean? She said. What does it do? It means Marchetti has decided negotiation isn't efficient. It means he's telling me that he has access to someone close to me. It means... Dante stopped, chose the next words precisely. It means he's considering using you as leverage. The word leverage sat in the room between them. Leverage, she said. Yes. To get the 60%. Yes. She looked at the photograph again. Herself, small and purposeful, crossing a path she'd walked 100 times. Watched, recorded, filed. What happens now? She said. Now I make some calls and you don't leave the estate without Caruso or Sal until this is resolved. He was already reaching for his phone. I know that's not what you agreed to at... It's fine, she said. He paused. I can work from here indefinitely, she said. I'm not going to argue about mobility in the middle of a threat assessment. That would be stupid. And I'm not stupid. He held her eyes for a moment. No, he said. You're not. She stood, picked up the photograph, handed it back to him. I want to know what you find out, she said. About my father's involvement, all of it. Not the amount you've decided I can handle, so all of it. A pause. All right, he said. She went back to her office. She sat at her desk. She opened the scheduling system and looked at it without seeing it for approximately 90 seconds, and then she closed the scheduling system and sat with her hands flat on the desk and let herself feel the full shape of what she'd just learned. Her father had made a call the night she arrived. He had traded her location, her safety, the fragile new thing she'd built in 3 weeks of difficult, honest work, for whatever Ricci's people had offered him. She did not know what they'd offered. She could guess. More time on the debt, a reduced figure. The particular currency of people who are drowning and will grab at anything that floats, regardless of what it costs the person standing next to them. She had known, in an abstract way, that her father was capable of this. You don't grow up in a house like that without understanding the arithmetic of a man who has always spent other people's resources to cover his own losses. She had known it abstractly, knowing it specifically, knowing it as a fact with a date and a phone number and a photograph with 3 words on the back, was a different country entirely. She stayed at her desk. She did not cry. She had made a policy years ago about crying, which was that she reserved it for things she couldn't solve, and this was solvable. Difficult and dangerous and requiring more of her than she'd planned, but solvable. She opened the scheduling system again. She worked. The call Dante made lasted 2 hours, and when it was finished, the information that came back through Caruso and into Serafina's office at 5:30 that afternoon was worse than the photograph. Caruso stood in her doorway. He was not a man who led with emotion. She had never seen him look rattled in 3 weeks, had come to rely on his steadiness as a kind of ambient indicator, the way you rely on a calm animal to tell you whether the air is safe. He looked rattled now. Not visibly, not to someone who didn't know him, but his weight was forward in a way she hadn't seen before, and he had his phone in his hand with the grip of someone who wants to be doing something more than standing in a doorway. "Mr. Vercelli would like you in the office," he said. She went. Dante was standing at the window when she came in. Not sitting. Standing, which she'd come to understand meant the situation was moving and he needed to move with it. He turned when she entered. "Close the door," he said. She closed it. "Your father didn't just tell them you were here," he said. "He's been in contact with Ricci's people for the past 3 months, before Thanksgiving, before he came to our arrangement." She stood very still. "The debt to my organization was real," Dante said, "but Ricci approached your father 6 weeks before Thanksgiving and offered him a deal. If Martin could get information about my estate, my schedule, my current operations, information that someone inside a domestic capacity could access, the debt would be cleared by Ricci's people directly." The room was so quiet she could hear the lake. "My father came to the Thanksgiving dinner," she said slowly, "already planning to leverage me. He didn't know I would be there that night. My visit was unannounced. But when I made the offer, when you accepted, he made the call to Ricci within the hour. Yes." She thought about her father at the Thanksgiving table. The bourbon looseness, the familiar aggression, the blow to her face with the open palm of a man who had stopped caring who was watching. She thought about how quickly he had turned sober when Dante walked in the door, the calculation behind the performance of the grieving patriarch. "He put me in here," she said, "as an informant. He put you in here believing you would eventually have access to information Ricci could use. He didn't know you'd be given the actual administrative role. That exceeded what he told them to expect. And when I did have access, he called you Sunday to rattle you, to make you feel unsafe enough to reach out to him. If you'd called him back, if you'd been frightened enough to want his help, he would have told you what to do, what to look for, what to photograph, what to send." She sat down. Not because her legs gave out, because she needed to be deliberate about everything right now, and standing felt like performance, and she was done performing. "He used the hit," she said, "at the table. He hit me so that I would look like someone worth rescuing." Dante's jaw moved. "I believe the escalation that night was real," he said carefully. "I don't believe it was entirely strategic. That's generous. It's accurate. The pattern doesn't require deliberate planning, just opportunism." She looked at her hands in her lap. Her father's hands were larger than hers, broader, and she had spent her whole life watching them and reading their tension for what was coming. She knew those hands better than she knew almost anything. She had never considered, not once in 26 years, that they were also the hands of a man willing to sell her. "Okay," she said. Dante looked at her. "Tell me the rest," she said. "There's more." Caruso looked wrong. A pause. "Ricci's people have made contact with a woman named Sandra Holt," he said. "She's a journalist, city desk. They've given her a partial version of this situation, enough to construct a story about me using a vulnerable woman as residential staff under coercive circumstances." Serafina looked up. "The photograph," she said. "The photograph would be Exhibit A in a story that positions you as a victim of trafficking-adjacent activity. The story runs, my operations are investigated, Marchetti's attorneys file during the disruption and take control of the real estate portfolio before I can counter." He said this without drama, laying it out the way she laid out contract language, precise and unsparing. "The timeline is probably 72 hours. She thought about the story. She thought about what it would look like from the outside. A young woman with a bruised face leaving her family home in a car sent by a known organized crime figure, moving into his estate, working for him, visible in a photograph taken through the gate bars. She thought about how it would read, how it was designed to read. There's a version of this story, she said, that's completely wrong and completely believable. Yes. And the counter to it requires me to go on record. It would help significantly if you were willing, he said, though I won't ask you to stop. She looked at him. Don't tell me you won't ask. We both know the situation. Tell me what going on record requires and what it doesn't require, and let me make an informed decision. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he told her. All of it. The attorney, the statement, the controlled interview with a different journalist who owed Dante's organization a professional debt, the timeline, the risks, the exact shape of what her name attached to this story would mean for the next year of her life. She listened. She asked 4 questions. He answered all 4. I'll do it, she said. Serafina? I said I'll do it. She stood. Her voice was level. She had worked very hard to make it level, and the effort was not invisible to her, even if it was invisible to him. This is my life in that story, my face in that photograph. If someone is going to speak about what I am and what I chose and why I'm here, it will be me. He was quiet. He was looking at her with something in his face that she was not going to examine right now, not in the middle of this. All right, he said. She went to the door. Your father, he said. What do you want to do about him? She turned. She thought about Martin Vale, the suit he wore once a year, the bourbon reaching, the palm of his hand flat and hard and certain, the phone call to Ricci made within the hour of her leaving. She thought about what it cost her to hold the image of this man in the same space as the word father, the particular expensive grief of that. Nothing, she said. I don't want to do anything about him. I want him to become someone I used to know. She left. She went to her suite. She stood at the window and looked at the lake and the bare trees and the iron gate visible at the edge of the drive, and she thought about the photograph of herself walking the path. And she thought, someone stood at that gate and watched me, and I did not know. And her father had sent them there. And none of that changed what she was going to do in the next 72 hours. The interview was arranged for the following morning. She spent the night preparing for it with the same rigor she'd brought to the contract on her first day, thinking through every question that could be asked, every frame that could be imposed, every angle that would require a clear and precise answer. She wrote nothing down. She sat in the chair in the sitting room with the lamp on and the lake dark outside, and she worked through it in her head until she knew it the way she knew the scheduling system, the way she knew the Marchetti file, the way she knew the sound of this house at night. At 2 a.m, she heard footsteps in the corridor. They stopped outside her door. A long pause, then moved on. She recognized the weight of them. She sat in the chair and listened to the footsteps move away and the house settle back into its nighttime silence, and told herself it meant nothing, that a man walking the corridors of his own house at 2 a.m. was doing exactly that and nothing more, and that the fact of him stopping outside her door was probably coincidence or habit, or the architecture of a house with limited hallway configurations. She told herself this. At 9 the next morning, the journalist came. Her name was Petra Voss, 40s, with the particular worn alertness of someone who has been doing this long enough to be immune to theater. She shook Serafina's hand in the sitting room off the entrance hall and set a recorder on the table and looked at Serafina with the professional directness of someone who is trying to assess whether the person across from her is going to be useful or performing. I've been given a general outline, Petra said. I'd prefer to hear it from you. Good, Serafina said. I'd prefer to tell it myself. Petra turned on the recorder. Serafina talked for 40 minutes. She was precise. She was clear. She told the truth in sequence, beginning with Thanksgiving night and the dining room and the bruise and the choice, continuing through 3 weeks of work and contract terms and filing systems and the photograph in this morning's mail. And she said her father's name once and did not say it again. And she said Ricci's name and Marchetti's name with the same flat accuracy she brought to contract language, and she did not apologize for any of it. When she finished, Petra turned off the recorder. She looked at Serafina for a moment. You understand, Petra said, that once this runs, you're in it, attached to his name, whatever that means going forward. I understand. Whatever that means, Petra said again, more slowly. Serafina looked at her. I made a choice 3 weeks ago with full information. I'm making this choice with full information. The name attached to mine is mine to manage. Petra looked at her for another moment. Then she packed her recorder and stood and shook Serafina's hand again. "It'll run tomorrow," she said. "Page 3, above the fold." She left. Serafina sat in the empty sitting room. The recorder was gone. The chair across from her was empty. The house was quiet in its mid-morning way, purposeful, inhabited, doing its business around her. She thought, "It will run tomorrow." She thought, "By tomorrow evening, everyone who needs to know will know she chose this, that she chose it clearly, that nobody used her because nobody can use someone who has decided what they are." She thought, "My father will read it." She pressed her fingers once, just once, to the fading yellow shadow on her cheekbone. Then she got up and went back to work. What she didn't see, what she had no way of seeing from the sitting room, was that 40 minutes before Petra Voss arrived, a car had stopped on the service road at the back of the estate. That the car had sat there for 11 minutes. That it had contained 2 men, and that one of those men had made a call, and that the call had gone to a number Dante had spent 3 weeks trying to trace, and that the voice on the other end had said, "The interview is a problem, move the timeline up." What she didn't know was that Marchetti had decided not to wait for the story. What she didn't know was that the thing coming was not a journalist and not a photograph, and not a phone call from a man with a bourbon problem and a moral vacancy. What she didn't know was that Dante, in his office at that moment, was looking at a message on his phone from Caruso that said, 3 vehicles, North Road, and that he was already moving toward the door with the particular compressed stillness of a man who has known this kind of moment before and knows exactly what it... The message on Dante's phone said 3 vehicles, North Road, and he was already moving before he'd finished reading it. Serafina heard him in the corridor, not footsteps exactly, but the particular compression of air that happens when a large man moves fast through a confined space. The sound of purpose with the volume turned down. She came out of the sitting room into the hallway, and he was already past her, jacket on, phone in hand, and he stopped when he saw her with the involuntary halt of someone whose plan did not include an obstacle at this specific location. "Go to your suite," he said. "Lock the door." "What's happening?" "Serafina, tell me what's happening or I follow you." His jaw. That careful, contained thing his jaw did. 3 vehicles on the North Service Road. Marchetti moved the timeline. She felt it go through her. Not panic, just the cold hydraulic drop of adrenaline arriving. How many men? Unknown yet. He was already moving again. "Suite, lock the door. Do not open it for anyone except Elena or Caruso." "And if it's not Elena or Caruso?" He stopped, turned, looked at her with an intensity that had nothing diplomatic in it. "Then you go out the east window, drop to the garden roof, and you run for the tree line and you do not stop." He held her eyes. "You understand me?" She understood him. He left. She did not go to her suite. She went to her office, because her office had a window facing the north grounds, and she was not going to sit in a locked room while the situation she was partially responsible for, her father, Ricci, the photograph, all of it feeding the intelligence that had brought those 3 vehicles to the service road, played out somewhere she couldn't see. She stood at the window. The north grounds were gray and bare in the December morning light, the tree line 50 yards from the fence, the service road invisible from this angle, but the gate at its entrance visible. A secondary gate, narrower than the main approach, designed for deliveries and maintenance. She watched it. 2 minutes. 3. Then movement at the gate, and she saw Caruso and Sal and 2 other men she knew by sight, but not by name, moving across the north lawn in the spread formation of people who have trained for exactly this kind of approach. They moved without urgency in the way that the most dangerous people move without urgency. Conserving, reading, already 3 steps ahead of the moment they were currently in. Then the gate opened. Not forced. Opened. Someone had a key, or a code, or had convinced the mechanism through means she couldn't see from this angle, and the gate swung inward and the first vehicle came through. A black SUV, moving slowly, which was somehow more alarming than speed would have been. Her phone buzzed. "Elena." She answered. "Get away from whatever window you're standing at," Elena said. "I need to see..." "You need to not be a target in front of glass. Move." She moved. Back from the window to the wall beside it, where she could see the angle of the grounds without being visible from outside. Her pulse was in her throat. She pressed her back against the wall and breathed through it. From this angle, she could see the SUV had stopped inside the gate. The door opened. A man got out. Not one of Marchetti's soldiers, someone above that, someone with the particular bearing of authority, which meant this was a negotiation with muscle attached rather than an assault, which meant there was still a window, still a frame within which words could operate. Then the second vehicle came through the gate, and the third, and from the third vehicle's passenger side emerged a man she recognized from the photograph Dante had shown her 2 days ago in the briefing she hadn't been supposed to see, but had because she'd been standing in the doorway of his office when Caruso spread the surveillance images on the desk and Dante had chosen not to close the door. Marchetti. He was here himself, which meant this was not a negotiation. Her phone buzzed again. Dante this time. "Are you in your suite?" "I'm in my office." A pause. "Of course you are." His voice was controlled, but she could hear something underneath it, not fear, something more functional than fear. The voice of someone managing multiple things simultaneously and adding her to the list. "Listen to me. There's a safe room behind the north wall of Elena's office. Elena knows the code. Get there now." "Marchetti's here," she said. "I can see him." "I know he's here." "What does that mean for the negotiation?" Serafina. Her name in his voice at this register. Not sharp, not angry, something rawer than either. "Please." She had never heard him say please. She left her office. She found Elena in the corridor, already moving toward her with the set expression of a woman who has managed crises in this house for 12 years and has a protocol for all of them. "Come," Elena said. The safe room was behind a panel in the north wall of Elena's office, a room off the main corridor, not large, with a monitor showing feeds from the estate's external cameras and a phone hardwired to a line that didn't run through the main system. Elena entered the code and the panel swung inward and Serafina went in and Elena started to follow and then stopped. "Someone needs to manage the house staff," Elena said. "Keep them calm, keep them in the kitchen, away from windows." She looked at Serafina. "You know how to watch a monitor?" "Yes." "Caruso's frequency is 4. If anything on those screens changes and you can't reach Dante, you call Caruso." She put a radio on the shelf beside the monitors. "Don't open this door." "Elena." But Elena had already pulled the panel closed, and Serafina was alone in the small room with 6 camera feeds and a radio and the sound of her own breathing. She looked at the monitors. Feed 1, main entrance, clear. 2 of Dante's men visible on the steps, positioned. Feed 2, east grounds, clear. Feed 3, north gate. The 3 vehicles, Marchetti's men spreading across the interior lawn in a pattern she didn't have military vocabulary for, but understood instinctively was designed to cover multiple retreat paths simultaneously. Feed 4, the north approach path, leading from the gate to the house's service entrance. And on that path, standing still, facing Marchetti across 20 feet of frozen gravel, was Dante. He had no jacket. He'd left too fast. He was in the dark suit he'd been wearing all morning, and he was standing in December without a coat, and the cold was visible in his breath, small clouds of it, regular and unhurried, like he was breathing at his normal rate because he had decided that was what he was going to do, and his body had complied. Marchetti had 4 men flanking him. Dante had Caruso to his right and Sal to his left, and that was all. She pressed her hand flat against the monitor and watched. She couldn't hear them. The feeds were visual only. She watched Marchetti speak. She could see his mouth moving, could see the performance in his posture, the way he used his hands in the expansive gestures of a man making a final offer. She watched Dante listen. Dante's posture didn't change. He stood with his hands at his sides and his feet planted, and he listened to whatever Marchetti was saying with the specific attention of someone cataloging everything for later use. Then Dante spoke. She watched his mouth. She could not read lips, but she could read register. Short sentences, she thought. Direct. He was not performing anything. Marchetti's posture changed. The expansiveness contracted. He leaned slightly forward. One of his flanking men moved. Caruso moved at the same time, intercepting the angle, not touching, just repositioning, a chess piece claiming a square. The flanking man stopped. Marchetti held up one hand without looking at the man. A command issued from peripheral vision, the unconscious authority of someone accustomed to having his gestures obeyed. Dante said something else, short, definitive. She watched his face. The face she had come to know in 3 weeks, the small shifts and compressions of it, the language of a man who said less than he meant and meant everything he said. And what she read on it was not threat and not apology and not the performance of negotiation. It was an ending. He was telling Marchetti it was over. Marchetti was still for a moment, then he laughed. She could see it, the laugh, the head tilted back slightly. The laugh of a man who believes the person across from him has miscalculated the dimensions of the situation. Then he reached into his coat. The next 4 seconds happened the way things happen when several people who have been waiting simultaneously decide to move. Overlapping, fast, the kind of motion that has no clean sequence when you're watching it, but that your nervous system registers as a single compressed event. Caruso's hand went to his jacket. Sal stepped forward. Dante did not move. What Marchetti produced from his coat was not a weapon. It was a phone. He held it up, deliberately, at eye level, facing Dante, and showed him the screen. She couldn't see the screen from the monitor. She watched Dante's face instead. She watched him read whatever was on that screen. She watched something happen to his face that she had not seen before in 3 weeks. Not fear. Something older than fear. The specific expression of a man who has just seen evidence of a thing he'd hoped wasn't true. She pressed harder against the monitor. Dante looked at the phone for 2 seconds. Then he looked at Marchetti. Then he said something, 1 sentence, and Marchetti lowered the phone and pocketed it and tilted his chin in a direction that meant something to his men, because they began moving back toward the vehicles. Not retreating. Withdrawing. The distinction mattered. Marchetti walked back to the 3rd vehicle. He opened the door himself, stopped with his hand on the door, and turned back toward Dante and said one more thing. She could see it, brief, across 20 feet of frozen gravel. Then he got in. The vehicles moved, the gate closed behind the 3rd one. Dante stood on the north path for a moment after the vehicles were gone. Just stood there. Caruso said something to him. Dante didn't respond. Caruso waited. Then Dante turned and walked back toward the house. She watched him cross toward the service entrance and disappear from feed 3. And then she watched feed 1 and he appeared at the main entrance, coming through the front door. And then the feed showed only the empty steps. She reached for the radio, then stopped. She waited. The panel opened 7 minutes later. Dante stood in the opening. He had found his coat somewhere. It was on, unbuttoned. And he looked at her in the small room with the 6 monitors, and he looked at the monitors and then back at her. "You watched," he said. "Yes." He came in, sat down on the edge of the shelf below the monitors. He did something she had not seen him do in 3 weeks, which was put his head down and press the heels of his hands against his eyes and stay there for a moment. She waited. He lifted his head. "What did he show you?" she said. He looked at the monitors. Feed 3. The north path, empty now, the gate closed. "Financial records," he said. "Originals. Showing that the real estate portfolio, not the 40% in dispute, the entire portfolio, was initially capitalized with money that has a traceable history I cannot afford to have traced." She was quiet. "It's old," he said. 15 years. The sourcing is from an operation that no longer exists, but on paper it looks..." He stopped. "It looks like the company was built on the wrong foundation," she said. "Yes." "And Marchetti has the originals." "He has copies. The originals are somewhere I haven't identified yet." He looked at his hands. "He's giving me 48 hours to sign over the 60% voluntarily. After that, the records go to the Federal Financial Crimes Unit." She thought about this. Precise and fast, the way she processed contract language. "The records are 15 years old," she said. "The statute of is complicated by certain subsequent transactions that kept the original money in motion." He looked at her. "My attorney has been aware of this exposure for some time. We believed it was managed." Marchetti found the unmanaged part. "Yes." She looked at the monitors, then at him. "Who gave it to him?" she said. "The specific transactions that connected the old money to current operations. That's not public record. Someone told him where to look." Dante was quiet. "Dante." He looked at her. His eyes were tired in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. "Ricci," she said. "Ricci had it." "Ricci's been inside of this organization for 6 years," he said. "Not a soldier, an accountant. The kind of person who..." He stopped. Jaw. That careful thing. The kind of person you trust because they make themselves invisible. And my father called Ricci. Your father called Ricci, and Ricci used that connection to identify you as an access point. And while we were managing the threat from the outside, the information had already been out for... He paused. I don't know how long. Long enough. She sat with this. The betrayal had not come from Marchetti, who was simply opportunistic. It had not come from her father, who was simply desperate and selfish in the precise way he had always been desperate and selfish. It had come from inside. From 6 years of proximity and invisible trust, and an accountant who had made himself indispensable and had spent that indispensability building an exit strategy on someone else's exposure. Ricci's gone, she said. Since yesterday morning, we think. She looked at the monitors. Feed 2. East grounds, the tree line, the lake beyond. The December light was flattening toward afternoon, the sky pressing down gray and indifferent. 48 hours, she said. Yes. What does your attorney say? My attorney says we fight it and we probably win in 3 to 5 years and the portfolio is effectively frozen for the duration. He said this without self-pity, just the arithmetic. Which means Marchetti gets operational control anyway while we litigate. Different mechanism, same result. And the alternative? Sign the 60, retain the 40, walk away from half of something I spent 11 years building. She looked at him. There's a third option, she said. He looked at her. The financial records, she said. Marchetti has copies, but you said the originals are somewhere you haven't identified. Yes, Ricci had access to them. Ricci is gone. But Ricci was an accountant. He kept records of his records. He would have had to maintain the leverage, which means the documentation of where the originals are kept exists somewhere in the files he managed. She held his eyes. I've been in your filing system for 3 weeks. I know where things are. If you tell me what I'm looking for, Serafina, tell me what I'm looking for, she said. We have 48 hours and your attorney needs time to work with whatever we find, so we have less than that. Tell me. He looked at her for a long moment, the kind of moment that has weight to it, that accumulates meaning as it passes because both people in it know that what's said next changes the shape of the ground they're standing on. If you find it, he said, if you find where the originals are, and we retrieve them before Marchetti can formalize his filing, there's no longer a threat. No copies without originals have the authentication to survive a legal challenge. Then we get the originals. It means going through Ricci's complete archive. 3 years of financial records in a system he designed specifically to be opaque to anyone who wasn't him. I've been untangling your former assistant's disaster for 3 weeks, she said. I have some experience with opaque systems. He held her eyes. She held his. Something shifted in the room. Not dramatic, not the kind of shift that announces itself. More like a door opening in a house you've been in long enough to know where all the doors are. The shift of 2 people who have been moving in parallel deciding, without a ceremony or a formal agreement, to move in the same direction. The archive is on a secured server, he said. Caruso has the access credentials. I'll have them sent to your workstation. Good. Serafina. He stopped, started again. If we find the archive and it doesn't have what we need, then we find something else. She stood. We have 48 hours. I'd like to start now. She moved toward the panel. He didn't move. Why are you doing this? He said. She stopped. She didn't turn around. Because it's my name in Petra Voss's article, she said. Because my father gave Ricci the opening. Because I've been in this house for 3 weeks, and I know what's here and what it's worth, and I'm not going to watch Marchetti take 60% of it on a 15-year-old exposure that wouldn't survive a legal challenge if the originals weren't available. She paused. And because you said please. She went through the panel and back into the corridor. Caruso was there. He had clearly been outside the panel for some time, in the efficient guardian way he had of being where he needed to be without making it visible. The archive credentials, she said. Mr. Verselli wants them at my workstation. Caruso looked at her for a moment. Then he took out his phone and sent the credentials without a word, which was the Caruso version of several different things at once. She went to her office. She sat at her desk. She opened the secured server with the credentials that arrived 40 seconds later and looked at 3 years of Ricci's financial archive, deliberately labyrinthine, built to confuse, structured like a maze designed by someone who wanted to be the only one who could navigate it. She set her shoulders. She began. The first hour produced nothing except the architecture of the system, the way Ricci had organized his misdirection, the patterns of his obfuscation. She mapped it on her legal pad in the way she mapped everything, logical, sequential, looking for the structure beneath the camouflage. By the second hour, she had found 3 filing anomalies, folders that referenced documents that didn't exist in the system, but whose naming conventions suggested they'd been exported to an external location. She noted them. By hour 3, Dante was beside her. He'd pulled a chair to the edge of her desk and was reading the legal pad as she filled it, asking 2 questions in 3 hours, both of them precise and immediately useful. By 4 in the afternoon, she found the reference. It was buried in a subfolder of a subfolder, labeled with a string of numbers that meant nothing until she cross-referenced it against the document naming conventions she'd cataloged in week 1 and recognized it as a location code, not a digital location, a physical one, a storage facility. Address included, formatted as a document reference number, invisible to anyone who didn't know what they were looking for. She set down her pen. "Here," she said. Dante leaned over, looked at the screen, looked at the number, looked at his phone, and cross-referenced something she couldn't see. His face did the thing it had done on the North Path when Marchetti showed him the screen, but reversed, the opposite movement, something releasing rather than contracting. He looked at her. She looked at him. "That's it," he said. "Yes." "How did you—" "The naming convention," she said. "I cataloged it in my first week. I didn't know what it was for then." He was looking at her with something in his face that she had not yet learned the name for. Not gratitude, something less comfortable than gratitude and more specific. The expression of someone who has been very much alone in a problem for a long time and has just, without planning for it, stopped being alone in it. "I need to make a call," he said. "Make it." He stood. He had his phone out. He stopped beside her chair, close. She felt the proximity of him, the way you feel warmth from something before you touch it. And then he put his hand on her shoulder, just for a moment. Brief and deliberate, the hand of someone who does not touch people carelessly and has chosen to touch this one. "Thank you," he said. She looked at the screen. "Go make your call," she said. He left. She sat in the quiet of her office and listened to his footsteps in the corridor and felt the warmth his hand had left on her shoulder and told herself, with decreasing conviction, that this was a business arrangement with defined terms and a fixed endpoint. 40 feet away, in his office, Dante was making a call that would send 4 men to a storage facility on the south side of the city before the close of business. And 3 miles away, in a rented room, Ricci was looking at his phone where a notification had just appeared. A notification from the monitoring software he'd installed on the secured server 3 months ago and had never mentioned to anyone. The notification said, "Archive accessed." And Ricci, who was not as gone as Dante believed, who had planned for this exact contingency with the thoroughness of an accountant who understood that the value of information is in controlling who has it, picked up a different phone and dialed a number and said, in a voice entirely without panic, "They found the storage location. You need to move." Ricci had planned for everything except the 40 seconds it took Caruso to receive a phone call and change direction. The call came from a contact inside the Southside storage facility, a man named Beto who did maintenance work and had been on Dante's informal payroll for 3 years because Dante believed in paying for proximity to places he might one day need access to. Beto's call lasted 11 seconds. He said 2 things. "Someone's here already, and they have a truck." Caruso relayed this to Dante in the corridor outside Dante's office at 4:41 in the afternoon, and Dante turned immediately and went back into the office and made 3 calls in under 2 minutes, and the 4th call he made was to Serafina's office phone. She picked up on the first ring. "Ricci had a monitoring alert on the server," Dante said. "He knows we found the location. He has people there." She was already on her feet. "How long?" "The storage facility is 22 minutes from here in current traffic. Our people are 18 out." A pause. Not hesitation, calculation. "The originals are in a climate unit on the 2nd floor. If Ricci's people get to them first and move them, we lose the location and we're back to 48 hours with nothing to show." "Your people get there first," she said. Probably. The word carried the weight of its own uncertainty. "But Ricci will have anticipated the race. He may have a second move. What's the second move? He files digital copies with a verification service in the next 30 minutes. Authenticated copies can stand in for originals in certain jurisdictions if the originals are claimed destroyed. Another pause. Which means even if we get the physical documents, if Ricci files verified copies before we can demonstrate we have the originals, we need to stop the filing, she said. The digital one. Yes. Where does he file from? The verification service is an online system. He'd need to upload sequentially. It's not a fast process with documents this size. If someone could access the service's intake system and introduce a delay, he stopped himself. I'm not asking you to do that. She looked at her screen. At Ricci's archive, still open, still mapped across her legal pad in her own handwriting. The intake system for document verification services, she said, uses authentication protocols that time-lock submissions. If a submission is started but not completed within a fixed window, it cancels and requires re-authentication from the beginning. Yes. Ricci would need to re-authenticate every time a submission fails. That buys time. Serafina, what I'm describing, I know what you're describing, she said. I'm telling you I can introduce the delays through the back end of the filing system if I have access credentials for the verification service account. She paused. Does Ricci's archive have them? 14 seconds of silence. She counted them. Third subfolder from the left in the compliance directory, Dante said. He used a standardized naming convention for external service logins. She was already in the directory. She found the credentials in 40 seconds. I have them, she said. If this is traced back, then we explain it in court, and we win because we have the originals, and Ricci is a 6-year embedded traitor, and the judge will have context. She pulled up the verification service interface in a second window. How long do your people need? 18 minutes. Then I need to give you 20. Tell your people to confirm the moment they have physical possession. Serafina, go, she said. Let me work. He went. She worked. The verification service's intake system was not designed with adversarial use in mind. It was designed for attorneys and accountants filing under deadline, people who needed reliability and speed, not people who needed to be stopped, which meant its authentication protocols were thorough and its error handling was robust, and its session management was exactly the kind of system that, when you introduced credential conflicts from 2 simultaneous access points, began generating authentication loops that required human resolution to clear. She logged into Ricci's account from her workstation. Then she opened a second browser instance and logged in again from a slightly modified credential string. Same password, username with a single character variation that the system would flag as a discrepancy rather than reject outright. The system flagged it, began its resolution protocol. She watched the intake queue on Ricci's account. Nothing yet. He hadn't started filing. 3 minutes passed. Then the queue moved, a submission attempt, beginning to upload. 47 documents. She could see the count in the intake log. Large files. The progress bar appeared. She introduced the second login conflict again. The system paused, generated an authentication challenge, required re-verification. The progress bar disappeared. She watched the queue, counted seconds. 31 seconds later, the submission restarted. He'd re-authenticated. She let it get to 11%. Introduced the conflict again. The system halted. She did this 4 times in the first 9 minutes. The submission never got past 18%. She could see in the activity log that the account was generating authentication errors at an accelerating rate. The system was beginning to treat the account itself as potentially compromised and was adding security layers between each attempt, which slowed re-authentication from 30 seconds to nearly 90. She checked the time. 11 minutes elapsed, 7 to go. The submission restarted. She watched the progress bar. Let it get to 23%, further than she'd allowed before, a deliberate choice, because if Ricci's people monitoring the account saw the same interruption pattern, they would identify it as interference rather than system error and might switch to an alternate filing method. She waited. 27%. She introduced a different conflict, not a credential overlap, a document format flag buried in the metadata of the upload stream that caused the system to query the file integrity of the third document in the sequence. The integrity check would take the system 4 minutes to complete. Automated. unchallengeable on Ricci's end without canceling the entire submission. The progress bar stopped. She looked at the time. 14 minutes elapsed. 4 to go. Her phone buzzed. Caruso. She answered without taking her eyes off the screen. 2 minutes out, Caruso said. The truck is still there. Ricci's people are still at the facility. Yes, 3 men. They don't know we're coming. Get the documents, she said. That's the plan, Caruso said, and ended the call. She watched the screen. The integrity check ran. The progress bar held at 27%. 3 minutes. 2. Her phone lit up. Dante, we have them, he said. His voice had changed. Still controlled, still even, but with something underneath it that was the specific register of a man who has been carrying a weight and has just put it down. Caruso has physical possession. Ricci's men were on the wrong floor. She exhaled, long and slow. How many documents? She said. All of them, the complete original set. A pause. Serafina, I'm going to close out the filing interference, she said. Cleanly. So there's no record of the account conflict that would survive a discovery request. How long? 5 minutes. All right. She spent the 5 minutes unwinding what she'd done. Closing the duplicate session, clearing the authentication conflict logs on the service's end, leaving the account in a state of simple interrupted submission rather than adversarial interference. When she finished, the account showed a failed filing attempt with a technical error code. Plausible. Clean. The kind of thing that happened when someone was trying to upload 47 large files on a deadline. She closed the browser windows. She sat back. Her hands were shaking slightly. She noticed this with detached interest. The way you notice a physical symptom after the emergency is over and your body has begun catching up to what the last 30 minutes actually cost it. She pressed her palms flat on the desk until the shaking stopped. Breathed. Then she got up and walked down the corridor to Dante's office and opened the door. He was there. Caruso was there. A third man she hadn't seen before, older, with the crisp professional composure of an attorney, was there, and on Dante's desk, spread across the surface in a fanned array, were the original documents. Physical paper. The particular irreplaceable weight of things that exist only once. Dante looked up when she came in. She looked at the documents. Your attorney should photograph and verify them tonight, she said. Authenticated copies filed with 2 separate preservation services before midnight, so Ricci can't claim the originals were fabricated. The attorney looked at her, then at Dante. She's right, he said. I know, Dante said. He was looking at her, just looking, in the way he had that she'd never entirely gotten accustomed to. Complete and unhurried, seeing exactly what was there. I'll be in my office, she said. Serafina. She stopped. He said, Stay. She stayed. She sat in the chair across from his desk while the attorney photographed and cataloged every document, while Caruso made calls in the corner of the room, while the December dark pressed in against the windows, and someone, Elena probably, brought coffee that went cold on the edge of the desk. She stayed and read through her legal pad and occasionally answered a question from the attorney and watched the process of one man's 6-year betrayal being systematically dismantled in a room that smelled like wood smoke and old paper. By 9 that evening, it was done. The documents were secured, the authentication was filed. The attorney had left with copies and with the particular satisfied efficiency of someone who has been handed a winning argument. Caruso had gone to coordinate whatever coordinating needed to happen beyond the walls of this room. Elena had cleared the coffee and said goodnight with the brevity of a woman who expresses care through function. The room was quiet. Dante sat at his desk. Serafina sat across from it. There was nothing left that required immediate action, and they both knew it, and neither of them moved. Marchetti will get the news tonight, Dante said. His attorneys will confirm by morning that the originals are in our possession and authenticated. The filing thread is gone. And the 60% dispute goes back to arbitration. With the original terms intact and the coercive leverage removed, his position is substantially weaker. He looked at the desk surface where the documents had been. It will take time, but it will resolve correctly. Ricci, she said, Ricci is no longer my problem. His voice on this was even and flat, and she understood that even and flat meant something specific, and she chose not to examine it further. And my father. The room held this question for a moment. Your father, Dante said, made his choices. The debt to my organization was real. The arrangement with Ricci was his own construction. He looked at her. I'm not going to pursue him. She looked at him. He's not worth the motion, he said simply. She thought about Martin Vale. She had been thinking about him in the spaces between tasks for the last several hours, not with the hot, complicated love grief she'd spent 26 years managing, but with something cooler, more final. The specific temperature of a decision that has been made and doesn't need to be revisited. He'll do it again, she said, whatever the next version of this looks like. He'll find another way to spend someone else's resources. Yes, Dante said. He probably will. And that's not my problem to fix. He held her eyes. No, he said. It's not. She nodded, looked at her hands in her lap, looked at the window where the December dark had gone fully black, the lake invisible beyond it, just the faint reflection of the room in the glass. My 3 months, she said. He waited. I've been here 23 days. She did the arithmetic aloud, not because she hadn't already done it, but because saying it made it real. I have 67 days remaining on the contract. Yes, he said. I'm going to finish them, she said. I want that clear. Not because of the debt clearing. I know you've already decided to clear it regardless. Because I started a job, and it's not finished, and I don't leave jobs unfinished. Something happened to his face. All right, he said. The scheduling system still has structural problems in the recurring events architecture. The Marchetti arbitration is going to generate 6 weeks of correspondence minimum, and there are 4 vendor relationships that need rebuilding after whatever the last 3 weeks have done to your response time on their communications. She looked at him. That's 67 days of work. Maybe more. Yes, he said. It is. A pause. Serafina. She waited. He came around the desk. He didn't sit on the edge of it. He pulled a chair and put it in front of her and sat in it, which put them at the same level, which she understood as a choice. He sat with his forearms on his knees and his hands loosely clasped, and he looked at her in the way that she had learned meant he was about to say something he had been holding for a while. I knew, when you walked into that office on your first morning, he said, that you were going to be a problem. She raised an eyebrow. Not that kind, he said. The kind of problem that... He stopped, started again. He was not practiced at this. She could see the unpracticed quality of it, the same way she could see when a document had been drafted by someone who understood the content, but not the form. I built this house, he said. Everything in it, everything around it. I built it specifically so that the things I carry don't have to be carried by anyone else. I know, she said. That's not an arrangement that works with another person in it. I know that too. And yet, he said. He looked at her hands in her lap, looked at her face. The bruise entirely gone now, 23 days of it healed to nothing. And yet I've spent 3 weeks watching you take apart every system that was broken and put it back together correctly. And I've watched you sit in a safe room and run interference on a financial filing while men with bad intentions were 40 minutes from this house. And I've watched you... He stopped, his jaw. That careful, contained thing. I've watched you be frightened and do the work anyway, every time. She was very still. I don't know how to do this, he said. I'm not performing humility. I genuinely don't know how to be the person who says the thing I'm saying. He looked at her steadily. But I know what it cost me to watch your name in a threat and understand that I was responsible for that. And I know what it feels like to have someone stay anyway. And I think, he paused, I think I've been in this house alone long enough that I've forgotten what I was building it for. The room was quiet, in the particular way of rooms where something real is happening. I'm not leaving at the end of 67 days, she said. He looked at her. Not because of the contract, she said, not because of the debt. I'm saying that whatever I decide at the end of 67 days, it won't be because of either of those things. I know, he said. And I'm not going to tell you I love you in the middle of the night after the worst 48 hours of both our lives. because that would be the kind of decision I've watched people make and regret. No, he said, don't. But I'm also not going to pretend that I don't know what I feel. She held his eyes. Because I've been performing things my whole life to survive, and I'm finished performing. He reached out. His hand covered both of hers where they rested in her lap. Not gripping, not urgent, just present. The weight of it. The deliberate warmth. 67 days, he said. 67 days, she said. They stayed that way for a moment. Then she pulled her hands back gently. Not a rejection. A boundary set by someone who knows the difference between what she wants and what she's ready for, and respects both. She stood. I'm going to sleep, she said. Yes. She went to the door, stopped. Dante. He looked at her. The piano room, she said. At the end of the east corridor. She looked at him steadily. Don't stop going in there. His face did the thing it had done in the kitchen that night. The brief, unguarded crack, the thing that was older than his reputation and more real than his stillness. I won't, he said. She went to bed. She lay in the dark and listened to the lake she couldn't see and felt the particular exhaustion of a day that had required every resource she had and then asked for more. She felt it in her shoulders and her hands and in the space behind her eyes, and underneath the exhaustion she felt something else, something she had not felt in this specific quality in as long as she could accurately remember. Safe. Not safe the way you feel safe when you've locked a door. Safe the way you feel safe when you've made yourself strong enough that the locked door becomes optional. She slept. 3 weeks passed. Petra Voss's article ran on the second morning, as promised, page 3, above the fold. It was precise and clear, and it told Serafina's story in her own words without editorializing, and the response to it was exactly what Dante's attorney had anticipated. Marchetti's legal team went quiet within 48 hours, recalibrating around the absence of their leverage. Ricci surfaced briefly in a city 2 states away, was located by people Dante paid to locate things, and became a matter for due process to handle, slowly and without drama. The arbitration over the real estate portfolio began in January, and proceeded with the grinding institutional patience of legal processes that are ultimately going to produce a correct result. Martin Vale called Serafina's phone twice after the article ran. She did not answer. His voicemails were different this time. Not aggressive, not performing the wounded patriarch. Just tired. Just the sound of a man who has reached the bottom of a particular kind of account and is beginning to understand the balance. She didn't call back. She wrote him a letter instead. 3 pages, handwritten, on the plain paper she kept in her desk drawer. She said the things she had spent 26 years not saying, not as accusations, not as a reckoning, but as a record. As the simple, honest notation of what had happened and what it had cost and what she was choosing now. She said she was not angry. She said she was not available to him in the ways she had always been available. She said she hoped he found a version of himself that didn't require other people to carry his weight. She mailed it on a Wednesday morning, standing at the mailbox at the end of the estate drive, with Sal standing 20 feet back, giving her the particular respectful distance of someone who understands the difference between protection and intrusion. She mailed it and walked back up the drive and went to work. The scheduling system's recurring events architecture was fully rebuilt by the end of the 5th week. The Marchetti correspondence, as predicted, ran to 6 weeks minimum, and she managed it with a precision that Dante's attorney called, in a phone call she happened to be on, quietly devastating to the opposing timeline. The 4 vendor relationships were rebuilt through a combination of direct calls, restructured terms, and the particular interpersonal legibility of someone who means what they say. She found out on the 41st day that she was good at this. Not the administrative mechanics, she'd known that since week 1. But the actual thing beneath the mechanics, the understanding of how an organization's relationships are its real infrastructure, more durable and more critical than any filing system. She was good at reading the health of those relationships, at knowing which ones were structural and which were cosmetic, at knowing when to be direct and when to give space. Dante noticed. He noticed in the way he noticed everything, without announcement through the adjustments he made in response. He began including her in the early stages of conversations she'd previously only seen the documentation of. He asked for her read on situations before giving his own. He He stopped prefacing requests with the formal Mr. Vercelli construction and used her name the way people use names when they've stopped thinking of the other person as a role. She noticed this too. The 67th day was a Saturday. She woke early, before 6, which she'd stopped being able to help. She lay in the bed in the room that had been hers for just over 2 months and looked at the ceiling and did what she always did first thing, ran through the day's priorities in sequence. Then she stopped because today's priorities were different and she needed to look at them directly. She got up, made coffee in the small kitchen attached to her suite, stood at the window with the mug in both hands and looked at the December morning. It had snowed overnight, the first real snow of the season, and the grounds were white and clean, and the tree line was dark against it, and the lake beyond was the particular gray of a sky that has finished what it came to do. She thought about what she wanted, not what was safe, not what was reasonable, not what she could defend to herself in the careful arithmetic she'd developed over a lifetime of keeping her wants small enough to protect. What she actually wanted, with no qualifications applied. She wanted this: the work, the house, the window, the coffee, the man 3 floors below who had been awake for an hour already. She could tell by the lights, and who would come to her office at 6:30 with his own coffee and read her notes and ask 2 precise questions and then go do work that was difficult and necessary, and that he did with the same unsparing honesty he brought to everything. She wanted to stay, not for 67 days, not on a contract, just stay. Because this was the first place she'd ever been that asked her to be entirely herself and had room for all of it. At 6:28, she was at her desk. The work was open on the screen in front of her. When the knock came at 6:31, she said, "Come in," without looking up. He came in. He sat in the chair he'd put beside her desk sometime in the 5th week and never moved back. She finished the note she was making, set her pen down, looked at him. "My 67 days are up," she said. "Yes," he said. "I'm not leaving." He held her eyes. "I know." "I want a new contract," she said. "Different terms. Equal standing, not employer and employee. Something that reflects what this actually is." He looked at her steadily. "I was going to propose something different than a contract." "I know that too," she said. "And I'm telling you that whatever you propose, I want it in writing. Because I spent 26 years in arrangements without written terms, and I know what that costs." She looked at him evenly. "I'm not someone you rescue, Dante. I'm someone you negotiate with." Something moved through his face, something that had been building for 67 days. "Then let's negotiate," he said. The conversation that followed was the most honest one she had ever been in. It lasted 2 hours and covered everything. What she needed, what he needed, what the life inside these walls actually required from both of them, what it would cost. They negotiated the way they'd negotiated the first contract, with clarity and without sentimentality, neither of them pretending that what was difficult was simple. And at the end of it, when everything had been said that needed saying, Dante reached into the desk drawer and produced something she hadn't expected. A key. Old brass, on a plain ring. He set it on the desk between them. "The estate," he said. "All of it. Not a room, not an office. The whole thing." She looked at the key. "You've been running this house better than anyone has in 12 years, he said. "I'm not offering you a key to a building. I'm offering you a place that's yours, that you chose, with both hands, knowing everything it is." She picked up the key. It was heavier than it looked. Old brass always was. She thought about the first morning she'd stood at this desk, bruise on her face, 18 minutes of packing representing 26 years of life. She thought about the dining room in Westmont, and the suit her father wore once a year, and the silence of a room full of people agreeing to pretend they hadn't seen what they'd seen. She thought about the card with the phone number, and the cold kitchen, and the choice she'd made at 11 o'clock on a Thanksgiving night that she hadn't known was the most important one she'd ever make. She closed her hand around the key. "I want it in writing," she said. He looked at her. The almost smile, the real one, the one she had learned, the one that was more complicated and more honest than any performed smile she'd ever seen on anyone. "I'll have the attorney draft something," he said. "Monday," she said. "I have the Harrington follow-up this morning, and the arbitration notes need to be filed by noon." "Monday," he agreed. She put the key in her pocket, turned back to her screen, picked up her pen. He stayed in the chair beside her desk. He had his own work open on his phone. The room settled into its working quiet. Outside, the snow on the grounds caught the early light and held it, and the lake was gray and enormous and indifferent in the beautiful way of things that have existed long enough to be beyond judgment, and the iron gate at the end of the drive was closed against the morning. And inside the gate, the paths were cleared and the lights were on in all the rooms that mattered. The city still talked about Dante Vercelli the way cities talk about people they fear, in careful voices, with the particular respect given to things that could cause damage if mishandled. His name moved through certain rooms like weather. None of that had changed. What had changed was smaller and more durable. A woman sitting at a desk in a room she had chosen, doing work she was good at, in a house that was hers now in the only way that mattered. Not by gift, not by rescue, but by the accumulated weight of 67 days of showing up and being entirely herself and refusing, even once, to be less than that. Serafina Vale had spent 26 years surviving a life that happened to her. This one she had built. The key in her pocket was cold. She'd warm it eventually. She went back to work.